I swear my stomach dropped before my brain could even process what I was seeing. The pastor was smiling, standing right there at the pulpit, holding up an envelope like it was some kind of prize. And my wife was standing beside him. She had that nervous smile on her face, the one she gets when she's not sure how people are going to react. "Let's give a big round of applause for Sarah," Pastor David said. The congregation erupted in polite clapping. I was halfway smiling out of habit when I noticed the handwriting on the envelope. It was mine. The same blocky letters I used to write mortgage payment on the front every single month so I wouldn't forget which one it was. The exact same envelope I had hidden in the kitchen drawer just 3 days earlier with the cash we needed to keep our house. At first, my mind didn't want to accept it. I thought maybe it was just the same kind of envelope. Maybe someone else used the same kind of handwriting. Maybe this was all a coincidence. But then the pastor turned slightly, and I saw the tear in the top corner, the same one from when I accidentally ripped it while sealing it. That was our money. $2,360 in cash. Gone. I froze in the pew. The pastor was thanking Sarah for her generosity toward the church building fund. He said she'd stepped up when the church needed her most. People were nodding, murmuring amen, and smiling at her. And all I could think was, why is our mortgage payment in his hands? The applause faded, the service went on, but I couldn't hear a single word. My ears were ringing, my pulse thudding so loud it drowned out everything else. Sarah walked back down the aisle toward me, sliding into the pew like nothing was wrong. She didn't even look at me, just kept her eyes forward like she'd done something completely normal. I wanted to whisper right then, to ask her what the hell she'd done, but I couldn't. Not here. Not with everyone watching. So I sat there, every muscle in my body tight, pretending to follow the sermon while my mind was spiraling. You don't just take the mortgage money. You don't just hand it to the pastor without telling your husband. We had been late before. We'd had to scrape together change to make payments. And this month, with the electric bill overdue, I'd been even more careful to put that envelope somewhere safe. So why would she do this? The rest of the service felt like hours. I couldn't focus on the prayers, the hymns, nothing. Every time I glanced at her, she kept that same neutral face, like she didn't sense the storm building in me. My palms were sweaty, and I could feel the weight of my own heartbeat in my fingertips. At one point, Mrs. Carter, the sweet older woman who always sat behind us, leaned forward to whisper, "You must be so proud of her." I forced a smile, but inside, her words burned. Proud? Proud that the roof over our heads might be slipping away? Proud that she blindsided me in front of the entire congregation? When the final prayer ended, people started filing out, greeting each other, making weekend plans. I was ready to grab her arm and pull her outside to talk, but then Pastor David walked over to us. He shook my hand, thanked me for supporting Sarah in her decision. I must have looked like a statue, because he gave me a funny look before turning back to her. "I can't tell you how much this means to our ministry," he said, patting her arm. "This will go a long way toward the renovations." Sarah nodded politely, not saying much. And in that moment, I knew two things. One, she had absolutely planned this without telling me. Two, whatever her reason was, it wasn't going to be something I liked. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to ask her about it. I was going to find out exactly why she did it, whether she wanted to tell me or not. Because if she was hiding this, what else was she hiding? People see you sitting in church on Sunday in your best clothes and think everything's fine. They don't see the unpaid bills stacked in the kitchen drawer. They don't see you sitting at the table at 1 a.m. with your head in your hands, wondering which payment can be pushed to next month without everything collapsing. Sarah and I had been married for 8 years. We bought the house 3 years in, a 2-story fixer-upper that seemed like a dream at the time. The interest rate wasn't perfect, but we told ourselves we could manage. For a while, we did. Then life happened. It started with my hours being cut back at work. At first, I thought it was temporary, just a slow season. But slow season turned into budget cuts, and suddenly, we were scraping to cover the mortgage each month. Sarah picked up extra shifts at the diner she worked at, but even with that, we were barely keeping up. We fell behind once, and that was enough to scare us both. The letter from the bank was cold and impersonal, just numbers and deadlines, but the weight it carried was suffocating. We managed to catch up, but from that moment on, every payment felt like we were buying time rather than security. The thing about financial stress is it doesn't just stay on paper. It seeps into your marriage. It turns every small disagreement into something bigger. It makes you suspicious over little things, a missing $20, a purchase you didn't know about, a bill you thought was already paid. I started noticing Sarah keeping her phone closer, checking it more often. Sometimes she'd leave the room to take a call, and when I asked who it was, she'd just say work. We weren't fighting all the time, not yet, but there was this unspoken tension between us. She knew I was worried. I knew she didn't like being questioned. Still, I trusted her. Even when we had to raid the change jar to pay the water bill, I trusted that she was doing what she could to help us. That's why I started writing mortgage payment on the envelope in big letters, a visual reminder to both of us that this was untouchable money. Sacred, in a way. The mortgage payment was $2,360. It was almost everything we had left after paying the other bills. I would set aside the cash the moment I got paid, put it in the envelope, and stash it in the kitchen drawer under the manuals for the coffee maker and the toaster, the kind of place no one would check unless they were specifically looking. At least, that's what I thought. 3 days before that church service, I had put the envelope there as usual. I remember because Sarah had been watching me count the money, leaning against the counter. She didn't say much, just nodded when I said, "This is for Friday." She knew what I meant. The payment was due Friday, no exceptions. So, when I saw that exact envelope in Pastor David's hands, it didn't just shock me, it rewrote everything I thought I knew about my wife. Because that money had only two places it could have gone, to the bank or to someone who took it. And if she'd given it away, it meant she had made a choice. I didn't know yet why she'd done it. Was it guilt? A promise she'd made to someone? Was she manipulated? Or, and this was the thought that made my stomach twist, was she helping someone else behind my back? The thing is, Pastor David wasn't just any pastor. He was well respected, sure, but he also had a way of getting people to open their wallets. He'd been pushing hard for the building renovation fund for months, sermons about sowing into the kingdom, testimonials from people who had given until it hurt. Sarah had always smiled politely during those parts, but she never seemed overly involved. At least, I thought she wasn't. That week, looking back, there were hints I missed. She had been leaving earlier for work, coming home later. Once, I found a stack of church flyers in her car and she brushed it off as helping a friend. Another time, she mentioned running into Pastor David at the grocery store, and I didn't think much of it. Now, all those little moments felt like puzzle pieces I hadn't bothered to fit together. And maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I'd been so focused on keeping the lights on that I didn't notice my wife was slipping away, or maybe she'd already been gone for longer than I realized. Either way, by the time we walked out of that church, I knew we were headed for a conversation that was going to change everything. If the scene at the church was the moment everything snapped into focus, then the weeks before were the blurry outlines I should have paid attention to. Looking back, the signs weren't just there, they were practically waving at me. It started subtly. Sarah had always been a creature of habit, up at 6:30, coffee in her favorite chip mug, 10 minutes scrolling on her phone before getting ready for work. But lately, she'd been up earlier, sometimes before me, and already dressed by the time I came into the kitchen. The first time I noticed it, she said she had an early meeting at the diner. That didn't make much sense. She wasn't a manager, and the only meetings they ever had were 5-minute huddles before opening. Still, I let it slide. One early morning doesn't mean anything, right? But then it became 2 mornings. 3. And not just early starts, late nights, too. Sarah had always been home by 9:15 at the latest, hair smelling faintly of fryer oil and coffee. But some nights, she started texting me, running late, covering for someone. No explanation beyond that. When I'd ask who she was covering for, she'd get vague, one of the girls from work, you don't know her, she's new. Her phone habits changed, too. We'd always been pretty open with our phones, not that we went snooping, but if one of us needed to look something up or answer a call for the other, it wasn't a big deal. Now, hers was always face down on the table. Once, she left it in the kitchen while she was in the bathroom, and when a message buzzed, I glanced at the screen. It was from D. Just a single letter. Before I could even think about it, she came back into the room, snatched the phone up, and said, "Work stuff." I didn't push. At least, not then. Around the same time, I started noticing little amounts of cash disappearing. Not hundreds of dollars, but 20s here, 50s there. Enough to notice. We kept a small emergency stash in the back of the pantry, inside an old coffee tin. One day it was $120, the next week it was $80. When I mentioned it, she said she'd used some for groceries, but when I checked the receipts, they didn't add up. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. But here's the thing about being married, you learn to pick your battles. And with the mortgage weighing over us, I didn't want to start a fight unless I had proof of something serious. One Friday evening, I decided to surprise her at work. She'd texted earlier saying she was covering the late shift. When I walked into the diner, though, she wasn't there. I asked her coworker, a bubbly college kid named Hannah, if Sarah was in the back. Hannah gave me a puzzled look and said, "She left over an hour ago." My stomach tightened. I thanked her, left, and sat in my car for a long time, trying to figure out where she might be. I even drove past the church, half expecting to see her car there, but the lot was empty. When she finally came home, she smelled faintly of vanilla, not her usual work scent. When I asked how work was, she just said, "Busy," and went straight to shower. Another time, I caught her in the garage rummaging through boxes. She jumped when she saw me and said she was just looking for old photo albums. But when I walked past the next day, the same box was sitting open, and inside, there was nothing but a stack of donation flyers from the church. Her explanations became rehearsed. Little phrases, always the same tone, "Don't worry about it. It's nothing. You wouldn't understand." And the more she said them, the more I realized they weren't answers, they were walls. I started testing her, in small ways. I'd mention bills we had coming up to see if she reacted with stress or guilt. I'd ask about shifts at work to see if she'd slip and contradict herself. She never did, but sometimes, she'd change the subject so fast it made my head spin. There was one night, about a week before the church service, when I almost asked her outright if she was hiding something from me. We were sitting at the table, eating takeout, and she kept glancing at her phone, tapping out short messages between bites. I finally asked, "Is everything okay?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Everything's fine. I'm just helping someone." Helping who? Helping with what? I opened my mouth to press, but she gave me that look, the one that says don't go there. So I didn't. And maybe that was the moment I lost control of my own marriage. Because when you choose not to ask the question, you're also choosing to live with the answer you might never get. The envelope incident made sense of the cash shortages and the secrecy. But it didn't answer the bigger question, why? Why hide it from me? Why give away money we desperately needed? Every time I replayed her face in my mind during that church service, the way she stood there beside the pastor, almost like a kid caught in the spotlight, I felt the knot in my chest tighten. I knew one thing for sure, whatever game she was playing, I wasn't just a bystander anymore. Because secrets in a marriage don't just stay secrets. They either get confessed, or they get exposed. Sunday morning started like any other. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The sun was barely up, casting pale gold light through the blinds, and the house felt unusually quiet. Sarah was already dressed when I came downstairs, a navy dress I'd only seen her wear once before, paired with a delicate silver necklace I'd given her years ago. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and there was something in her expression I couldn't place. It wasn't joy exactly. Not nerves, either. It was purpose. "You're up early," I said, trying to sound casual. She smiled, the kind of smile that gives nothing away, and replied, "Just wanted to make sure we weren't late." We never worried about being late for church. Most weeks, we slipped in just before the first hymn. But that morning, she was ready almost an hour ahead of time. It felt like she'd been waiting for this day. We drove in near silence. The radio was on, but I couldn't have told you what song was playing. I kept glancing at her, trying to read her face, wondering if I should bring up the late nights, the missing money, the phone calls from Dee. But every time I opened my mouth, I pictured her shutting me down the way she always did. So, I stayed quiet. When we pulled into the parking lot, Sarah immediately spotted Pastor David outside, greeting people as they arrived. She waved at him before we'd even parked, and he waved back, his smile wide and warm, too warm. I noticed his eyes flicker to me for just a moment, then away again. Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. They'd been working on the fellowship hall renovations for weeks, and the scent carried into the sanctuary. The chatter of the congregation echoed off the high ceiling, mixing with the rustle of hymnals and the squeak of shoes on polished tile. We took our usual seats, 3 rows from the front. Sarah's posture was straight, almost formal. She clasped her hands in her lap, but her foot tapped softly against the carpet. Her eyes weren't on the pulpit, they kept darting to the left, toward the front row, where a deacon's table was stacked with papers and donation envelopes. The service began like usual, hymns, announcements, the offering plate making its rounds. But I noticed something strange. Pastor David's sermon seemed shorter. He was rushing through the points, his voice bright but his eyes scanning the crowd more than usual, like he was waiting for a cue. Then came the moment. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and smiled in that slow, deliberate way that meant he was about to make some kind of big announcement. "Before we continue, I want to take a moment to recognize someone very special," he began. The congregation murmured softly, heads turning. He launched into a speech about generosity. About sacrifice. About how God works through people willing to give beyond their means. I felt Sarah shift beside me. Not fidgety, more like bracing. "And today," Pastor David said, his voice swelling, "I want to honor someone who has truly lived out the words of Scripture. God loves a cheerful giver." He turned toward us. "Sarah, would you come join me at the front?" I felt my stomach twist. She rose without hesitation, smoothing her dress as she walked. Every step echoed in my ears. Pastor David held up an envelope. "This," he said, "is one of the most selfless gifts we've received in our efforts to renovate God's house. Sarah has shown us what it truly means to give." Polite applause began, swelling into something warmer as people leaned toward one another, smiling, nodding in admiration. Sarah stood beside him, smiling shyly. She glanced out over the pews, and then her eyes met mine for the briefest second. Something flickered there. Guilt? Regret? Or was it defiance? And then I saw it. The writing on the envelope. My handwriting. The same block letters, mortgage payment. The same tear in the corner from when I sealed it too quickly. The world seemed to slow down. My chest tightened, and the air in the room seemed to thin. My mind fought it for half a second. Maybe it's just a coincidence, maybe it's not the same envelope, but deep down, I knew. I knew. $2,360 in cash. Gone. Pastor David kept speaking, words washing over me without sticking. He talked about how faith is proven in action and how gifts given in trust will multiply blessings. The congregation murmured amen in unison. Mrs. Carter, sitting behind me, leaned forward and whispered, "You must be so proud." The words hit like a stone to the chest. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Pastor David handed the envelope to a deacon for safekeeping, then patted Sarah on the shoulder as though she'd just saved the church from ruin. She nodded politely, still wearing that small, reserved smile. From my seat, I didn't clap. I couldn't move. Because in that moment, the truth wasn't just in my head, it was right there in plain sight, in the hands of someone who had no idea it was supposed to keep a roof over our heads. The rest of the service went on like nothing had happened. People sang, prayed, took communion. But for me, the morning was already over. All that was left was the reckoning. The second the final hymn ended, Sarah headed for the side door. No coffee, no small talk, straight to the parking lot. I followed. Not quickly, steady. Eyes on the back of her head. Outside, sunlight was blinding. Kids yelled at the playground, inside me, a storm. She was halfway to the car when I called, Sarah. She turned. A quick flinch, gone. What was that? I asked, quiet but heavy. What was what? She said, reaching for the door. Don't, I said. The envelope. She froze. You mean the envelope? Our mortgage, I said. Why is it a church trophy? It's not a trophy, she said. It's going to something important. Important? Keeping our home is important. A couple walked by. She smiled, then slid into the driver's seat. I got in, shutting my door too hard. We sat in the hum of the engine. Finally, I was going to tell you. When? After an eviction notice? You don't understand, then make me. She gripped the wheel. Pastor David kept saying they were short for renovations, and I felt like I needed to help. With our mortgage? Tears brightened her eyes. It wasn't just that. She stopped. It's what? She looked at me, fear and shame. They'd been helping someone. Real trouble. I can't say who, but they needed the money more than we do. More than we do? We're barely hanging on. I know, she whispered. If they don't get help, they could lose everything. Worse than a house. So you decided for both of us, I said. No discussion. If I told you, you would have said no, she said. I couldn't let that happen. Silence pressed between us. She wasn't wrong, I would have said no. That didn't make it better. You will tell me, I said. Or I go ask why my handwriting is on his big gesture. Her lips trembled. Please don't. Talk. She stared through the windshield. The person who needs help is connected to you. Cold moved through my chest. Connected how? She showed me her phone. A thread labeled D. Newest message, we tracked 2 of the serials from the envelope through the deacon's petty cash. Call me. Who is D? Detective Daniels, she said. Financial crimes. I laughed without humor. You gave away our mortgage because you're working with a detective? I didn't give it away. I let it be seen, she said, steady now. Daniels needed marked bills to trace where the renovation money goes. Cash only. Something memorable so they'd show it off, your handwriting, the torn corner. So we risk the house while you run a sting? I've been meeting him for weeks, she said. Flyers in the garage? Evidence. Early mornings? Statements. Late nights? Logging. The church raised more than enough, twice. But the books never match. Cash disappears after it passes through one person. I didn't want to ask. Whose? Pastor David's. The name hit like a hammer. You're wrong, I said, weak. He moves money through a crisis assistance fund only he approves, she said. Daniels thinks it's a shell. The person connected to you is your sister. My sister? Emily applied for help months ago, Sarah said. Medical debt. Denied for lack of documentation. Daniels found her file. Everything was there. The request was approved, then the funds were reallocated to pastoral expenses. The car felt tilted. Emily had been too proud to ask me. I assumed she was figuring it out. I hadn't imagined she'd gone to the church. I hadn't imagined she'd gone to him. I wanted to tell you, Sarah said. But Daniel said if word got out, he'd shut it down and vanish the trail. We needed a big, visible donation he couldn't resist touching. That's why I stood up there. Anger stumbled into shame. I hadn't known about Emily. You risked our home, I said, duller now. I risked a month, she whispered. Daniel said we'd get it back as evidence once the chain is documented. The insurer might compensate donors when this breaks. A knock on the window. Pastor David leaned down, gentle smile pasted on. I cracked the glass. Everything all right? He asked. Thank you again. Such a blessing. His eyes flicked to Sarah's purse, then to me, quick, assessing. We're fine, I said. One question, do donors get reports on the renovation fund? His smile held, something tightened near his eyes. Of course. We post summaries each quarter. And the crisis fund, I said. I heard some applications get reallocated to pastoral expenses. A hairline crack. That's a misunderstanding. If you have concerns, make an appointment. He tapped the roof. Blessings. He walked away. We watched him go. My pulse thudded. He acknowledged the fund without prompting, Sarah murmured. Daniels asked me to listen for that. He slid past it too smoothly, I said. I exhaled, anger cooled into resolve. As we pulled to the edge of the lot, the bell in the steeple chimed the hour, each strike counting out the distance between who we had been this morning and who we were now. I kept seeing the envelope in his hands, imagining it sliding through offices, drawers, pockets, a breadcrumb trail with our future stuck to it. Part of me wanted to turn around and rip it back. Another part, the part stung by Emily's file, wanted proof so solid it could not be prayed away. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Detective Daniels. I need both of you at the station today. Do not confront him. The serials are moving. I'm still furious, I said. You should have trusted me. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I know. I thought I was protecting you. And Emily. I nodded. We go together. We finish this together. Then we figure us. She wiped her face, a shaky breath. Okay. She put the car in gear, then paused. I'm sorry. I looked toward the church doors, at the easy smiles and small talk, and felt resolve harden. I know, I said. Now let's go find the truth. The police station felt colder than I expected, and it wasn't just the air conditioning. Detective Daniels met us in a small room with a file so thick it made my chest tighten. He didn't waste time. The marked bills from our envelope had passed through 3 hands in less than 24 hours. First, the money was deposited into the church's building fund account. Second, it was transferred to a personal account belonging to David R. Morris, Pastor David. From there, it was moved again to a shell company registered in another state, linked to large cash withdrawals that didn't match its stated purpose. Among the documents was a statement with my sister's name, Emily Walker, showing $4,200 approved from the Crisis Assistance Fund but stamped in red with a single phrase, funds reallocated. I swallowed hard. Emily had never seen a cent. Daniels confirmed they could prove the money was diverted. Sarah asked how long it would take to act. He told us they already had enough for a warrant but needed to catch him with donor funds in his possession outside the church accounts. Our envelope, he said, was the perfect bait. The rest of the day blurred into paperwork, questions, and tense silences. By evening, we were sitting in our car across from the church, watching the light in Pastor David's office burn long after the last parishioner had gone home. Just before 10, we saw him step out carrying a leather satchel, glancing around quickly before unlocking his car. Within seconds, unmarked police vehicles blocked both ends of the street. Flashlights flared. Commands rang out. The kind of scene you never expect to witness involving the man who baptized half the people you know. Daniels came over to us afterward, his expression grim but satisfied. "It's over," he said. "We recovered the cash, along with records tying him to misappropriated donations from at least 7 people." We drove home in silence. The next Sunday, the church was buzzing with whispers. An interim pastor led the service. Some people glared at us, others quietly thanked Sarah. 2 days later, Emily called. She told me Sarah had explained everything and said she never imagined she'd risk our mortgage to help her. I told her she should have come to me about applying for help. She admitted she didn't want to be a burden. That night, Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table. She said she should have trusted me, not just to understand, but to stand with her. I told her I should have asked more questions instead of letting the distance grow. We realized the money had never been the real problem. It was the trust, or the lack of it. We'd both let silence take the place of honesty, thinking we were protecting each other. But secrets don't protect the people you love, they protect the problems you're too afraid to face together. We still have our house. The bank granted a short extension once the story made the news, and Daniels made sure the recovered funds were returned to their rightful owners, including us. But I will never forget the sight of that envelope in Pastor David's hands, or the way my wife stood beside him with the weight of our home in her purse. If this story made you think about trust, communication, or the masks people wear, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true stories that pull back the curtain on real life. You never know, the next one might make you see your own world differently.